Great, okay, thank you very much. New messages. Thank you, everybody. I can barely see everybody at the back. Everybody's filled out. Hello, my name is Peter Campbell. As you've heard a couple of times, I'm not Rory. Not quite as awesome as Rory, perhaps. But Rory couldn't be here, unfortunately. He's stuck on a plane somewhere, coming back from England. So you've got me instead. But I decided to keep Rory's title because I thought it was a really good title. I thought, why change it? Why not just stick with his topic and see what I can tell you from my experience, which I think is probably quite similar to what Rory would have covered anyway. We compared slides and there was quite a lot of overlap. So foundations for awesome, or kind of what lies beneath, is probably the way I would have titled it, but we're kind of sticking with the awesome theme. So the full title that Rory went with was Foundations for Awesome, Why Building Digital Services means more than just the things that a user sees. And I guess, I mean, as Joe has kind of said at the top of at the start, you know, user-centered design and user research and understanding user needs is kind of one of the things that is really prevalent in most of the digital services work that we do in Kainos, and that's a really good thing. And it's really great to see the swing towards that from, you know, the bad old days of guessing what users wanted, or you know, putting requirements in place that some super user thought they knew what was best for the users, and then finding out later on when you built the thing that it actually was totally wrong. So it's really great to see that kind of swing. But I guess the thing that sticks out from that is that if you're just thinking about the users, and that's a great place to begin, but you get completely distracted by just understanding what users want to see and what's therefore valuing and prioritizing just those things. Have you missed out on some of the other things that are important, that could bite you, that could prevent your service from being particularly awesome? Well, I think so, and I want to explore some of those things tonight. So this is LinkedIn. I don't know if any of you are product managers at LinkedIn, or maybe you know product managers at LinkedIn, but I seen this the other day, right? This happened last week to me, where it popped up and it said, oh, you've got a work anniversary, which is a weird kind of virtual reality thing which doesn't really exist in the real world. But it told me I had been 19 years at Kainos, which is actually wrong. It's not true. I've only been there 18 years, but it's almost correct. I'm currently CTO for digital services at Kainos. I've been doing that for about 3 or 4 years. But I have been at Kainos for quite a long time. I've never been a product owner or a product manager. So I've worked with plenty of product owners, Lisa being one of them, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago. But I've never been a product manager myself. But throughout the time that we've been working largely with the UK government, we've worked across many digital services, and those have been big things for citizen nationwide services, for driving licenses and being able to view your license or make changes to it, but also things that go all the way through to, you know, applying for emergency travel documents if you're stuck abroad and you've lost your passport, or for MOT tests across the UK, or for some of the civil reform work that's going on as well in justice at the minute. So lots and lots of big programs, and all these things are trying to create experiences for users that give them a much, much better experience from what they have today. But I guess one of the reasons why this is really important to talk about the things that kind of the user cannot see, that lie beneath the surface, is that digital services fail. In the same sense that government IT projects have been famed to fail for many, many years, digital services fail as well. There's 5 different reasons that I can think of why digital services fail. And this is one of the things I wrote earlier on this year in a blog post. Now, obviously, I don't want to try and cover all these tonight, but I kind of want to focus in on the 5th one, because the 5th one's particularly pernicious and it's kind of silent but deadly kind of appeal to it, because, you know, many of you are product managers, product owners. Your job is to make sure that you're specifying and describing the right product. So, you know, number 4, you're all over number 4. That's never going to happen for you. But it does happen in some cases where the wrong product is ended up with once it's put in front of users and made live. But a situation can happen very easily where you've actually got the right product and you've built the product in the right way, but actually, so it works, but it can't be used for some reason. It's a catastrophic failure of some kind, which prevents your product from being used. It's that kind of failure, and that's kind of macro failure that I want to kind of explore a bit more detail tonight and try and understand where I've seen it and how we can try and avoid it, how you can avoid it in your products. So the first thing is there's a lot of attention given to features whenever it comes to defining a product, which is just right, because it is about features. It's about what this product will do. We've seen Lisa's prototype product tonight, and very clearly Lisa's demoing the features to you, and that's really, really important. But there's more to it than features. And what can sometimes happen is that whenever a product is being described and it's just being described in terms of its features, or just being valued in terms of its features, then the underlying way in which that product works can sometimes seep through to the users or leak through to the users. So you've tried to abstract yourself from all of that horrible technical detail, how it works, and just focus on what it is. But sometimes that can kind of come through to your users. And if it does, then it can have really negative vibe and impact for your product. So you can't afford to ignore the how. So I was trying to draw what this looked like, and I ended up with this super simple description of what this looks like. So if a product is kind of described in terms of what it is, the features, the what that sits on top, and the how is how your product works under the covers, it's very easy sometimes to draw a line and focus above the line on what this thing is, and try and kind of constrain the how with the engineers. That's the engineers' kind of problem, to work out how this product's going to be put together. I'm just going to focus in on the users and what they want. But the challenge is that the seepage can happen from the how through to the what, such that your users can be shocked by something that wasn't intended to be a feature becomes a negative feature. So examples. So we all remember back to, whenever it was, iPhone 4 era, whenever the iPhone 4 was meant to have got a massive problem. I'm not sure how many people it actually affected, but it was a big thing. And AntennaGate was how Steve Jobs described it. But what that described was that the way in which the antennas had been designed inside the iPhone was largely a hidden thing, largely a thing that you weren't meant to see. It wasn't really about going to buy an iPhone because it got great antennas, but the way in which they chose to design it actually had a little band around the outside, the metal band thing, and wee cuts in it so that the antenna could actually work correctly. And if you held it in a certain way, it apparently made it give it a weakened the antenna, and the reception wasn't so good, and people were losing phone calls and so on. So it's a big, big deal for lots of people, because they didn't expect this, and something that was an internal, hidden, how this product works, suddenly became something that impacted people who bought their latest and greatest iPhone. And it affected, in a bad way, many of those people. So the alternative was buy a case, or hold it in a different way, or go and buy a different phone. So it had a very clear impact on the user experience. Another example. Titanic. We're in Belfast, so I thought I'd have to have a Titanic analogy somewhere. So I'm just trying to imagine the product designers for the Titanic, when they sat around and described all of the different features they're going to put in the Titanic. There must have been thousands and thousands and thousands of features they're going to try and include in this. And in my head, I imagine lots and lots of those focused on luxury items for first-class passengers, and not so luxury for second class, and very, very nothing much at all for those who are in cattle class. But one of the features that the designers of the Titanic did put a lot of effort into was the containers underneath the ship that tried to segment the ship so it could be more reliable if it got breached by the sea. And the story goes, and again, it's hard to know how much is actually true or not. The story goes that they designed it so that there was a threshold of how many of these things could get breached before it was a catastrophic problem. And of course, during the fateful time when it hit the iceberg, it was going too fast, and it actually ripped too big a hole, which opened up too many of these different containers, which obviously sunk the ship. So reliability was a feature that wasn't perhaps designed wasn't sold to passengers as a key thing. Perhaps safety was, in a certain sense, in that it was supposedly unsinkable. But it certainly, reliability was not the key thing up there with the luxury. But the reality of the situation with the Titanic, sad as it was, that the fact the ship was sunk meant that all of those luxury features were gone, were irrelevant, couldn't be used. So something that was not seen, not visible, unimportant perhaps, became super important and catastrophically failed the ship. So that's an example of two different products, the phone and the Titanic, where something that wasn't a headline feature, wasn't designed as a headline feature, but became catastrophically bad and failed the overall products. Now, how does that compare to digital services and software products? Have we considered how those things can be taken into account to give us... Oh, you've lost the slides. There you go. Have we considered how those can be taken into account to avoid failure for our products? So when is the right time to prioritize this? Well, beta is kind of the right time now. One of the things that is kind of popular, particularly, and I think it's been popularised by UK government and GDS in particular, is a life cycle for digital services, which starts with discovery, goes into alpha, and then beta, and then live. And that's great because it gives a really, really clear starting point and progression through for every digital service that's developed across the entire UK government, across all the departments. So that consistency is nice. And the focus for each of those stages is also very, very clear. So what is kind of boiled down to is that discovery is kind of focused on do users need the thing? So you're trying to understand the context of your users. The alpha stage is kind of moving on to say, okay, there is a need. What is that? What is that product going to be that fills that need? And the beta stage kind of comes in and said, okay, you've proven that the users need something. You know what it needs to be, how it should work. Let's build this thing for real. And then live stage takes that and says, okay, we've got this thing that's been built. Let's improve it and iterate it and take it forward for the next few years. So you've got this really nice life cycle for services. What can often happen is because the first two stages are very much focused on the users and understanding the context of the users and researching the users and developing out what those users really need, and then providing them with examples of screens and user interactions and flows and so on that works for them. You can get to a point where it becomes almost, and I've seen this a few times, where it becomes almost a feature hunt by the time you get to beta. So it's a race to add as many features as you can because you know you've got the product and you're doing that research and it's kind of rolling forward. And there can be a really, really, really good opportunity to take a breath at beta and say, okay, we know we've got the product that works, so we've got the evidence to show for it from the research. We need to actually take stock at beta and include those things that are perhaps not as important to users, they don't see them, into our design from beta onwards. So one of the things that we kind of characterize this failure as is non-functional failure. And unfortunately, isn't really that easy to describe what non-functional failure is. There isn't really a common definition for what non-functional failure is. But it's clear that non-functional failures can very easily cause these kind of macro failures, these kind of big scale catastrophes with your services. Now, I don't know if all of you are familiar with non-functional requirements. I'm sure you are. And at least that's what it used to be called. So in the old days, we had requirements and non-functional requirements. What you see in many agile teams nowadays is your user needs described as stories. And you sometimes actually see non-functional requirements still separately described as a separate thing. Sometimes not, but you sometimes see them as being separate. But the key thing is that non-functionals are concerned with how it works, how your product works, not what it does. And because of that distinction, they can sometimes be separate, which is usually, in my experience anyway, a bad thing whenever non-functional needs are being kept separate from the user needs. So this is a reference a guy called Adzik. Very smart guy. He actually took Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which described human needs. I'm sure Joe could tell us a whole pile more about this from her background. But he took this hierarchy of needs, which describes at a very base level, at the bottom of the pyramid, what things are totally essential, and then slowly adds on top things that are less prioritized in terms of needed, all the way up to the pinnacle. And he turns this into something that applies to software. In his case, he was looking at software quality. But what's interesting about this is that if you look at this triangle and you look and say, okay, where are the features? Where are the non-functional features in this picture? The features are all at the top. So the features are all in useful and successful. The bits that the users are engaging with. The things that are at the bottom of that triangle, deployable, performance, secure, usable, those are all kind of key non-functional demands or needs. And the point that he's making on this is that without the foundation of performance, security, deployable, functionally okay, there's no point in having any features. Your features are built on that foundation. So it's really key that that foundational piece is in place and is solid enough so that your features can shine and users can benefit from them. So one of the things that he had there was at the bottom was deployment. So I guess the question to ask yourself if you're a product manager, can you safely deploy a change to production quickly? And by quickly, I mean within a couple of hours or even a couple of days. How can you do that? Because if you can't change your product quickly, then you kind of getting into the sticky territory of being slightly hamstrung and being able to improve or fix or patch or change your product. And it's really important to, whenever you go around, I go around lots of our projects to understand and look at what our teams are doing. And it's really key to look and to see, okay, does this team have a deployment pipeline to allow them to go from development through to production in a safer way as possible with the right controls, but also in a really timely and quick way. And if they can't do that, then it usually displays some kind of challenges with the team and the way the team's working, because that's kind of fundamental to making any change to this product and delivering this product to its users. Next thing is performance. So, again, ask yourself the question: are you continuously testing the performance of your digital service at scale? Because many don't, many aren't, and sometimes performance is taken as something that happens later on at the end. Sometimes it's never. Sometimes it's semi-regularly. But ultimately, if you can incorporate, the Holy Grail is if you can incorporate continuous testing of your performance of your service into your pipeline, then you know that every single feature that is being developed before that goes through to production, you've got certainty and confidence that it's not going to fall over because there's an extra few users or because users happen to get up earlier that morning or whatever it may be. And there's different ways as well of doing that testing so you give yourself more confidence. Sometimes it's very difficult to know how many users are going to use your product. Sometimes there's no historic evidence to give you any data to say, well, this is how high the peak should be. But typically, teams that face that will do stress tests, for example, against the product to say, well, we don't know what the peak should be, but we know when it's going to fail. We know in this particular build the product's going to fail. And you as a product manager then have the information to decide whether that's a risk you want to take or not. The last one on this is a question about security. So, cybersecurity is a hot topic. It's very, very much in demand. Lots of people getting paid lots of money to specialize in cybersecurity today, because I guess we're working in a world with public internet, open networks, public cloud as well, that lots of organizations have moved to, and yet the data must be secured, and it is sensitive. And of course, there's plenty of organizations that have been embarrassed by data that they collect being exposed or hacked or stolen or whatever, and that's led to fines and criminal charges and whatever else. So it's really key that we've got security baked in by design. But the typical approach to that is to do a one-off pen test before you go live, or a one-off pen test before your release is ready, with some external consultants. And that's fine. That gives you some confidence, and it's good that it's external. But it's even better if you can get your teams to incorporate that testing continuously through the product development, so every sprint. And if you look at if you ask these pen testers what they do, there's some really good pen testers that are out there, but most pen tests incorporate running of 3 or 4 standard industry tools that scan the code or the application for known vulnerabilities. So there's a stack of known vulnerabilities. There's a small set of common scanners. So there's nothing stopping teams and you from actually running those scanners continuously or as part of your deployment pipeline, and identifying issues well before you engage some external consultants to give you the bad news. So lots you can do to incorporate that in, and those things will give you early warning of potential catastrophic issues with your services. NFR, spoke NFR, ban NFRs, right? So as a product manager, product owner, there's often this divide that I talked about before with NFRs. My advice is don't ever allow NFRs to exist as a separate thing. It's just user needs. It's just stories, and don't let anybody trick you into having technical stories as if they're somehow separate and different with a different set of users. Normal rules don't apply. Stories are stories, and all stories are needs, and all needs will have some user who's associated with them. So if you treat them all the same and not have this separate category, then I think what that can allow is kind of breaks down the barriers of some of the mystique and fog and so on that's associated with some of these supposedly technical stories. So, for example, what we've seen in many of our teams is, so for performance, for example, sometimes done as stories, but more often I've seen it done as acceptance criteria built into as a standard into many user stories. For security, what you'll sometimes have is evil stories, or stories where you'll have a persona of a hacker who's going to try and break your product. Again, for reliability or for operational demands, those can be stories with a different user associated with them. And so they can be incorporated in and taken just the same as any of your feature-rich stories, but just with a different emphasis. And if you've got that, then you've got one backlog, you've got one type of story, and you can deal with that in the same way. That's all I was coming to say. Thank you very much for listening. Time for questions.